Hello everyone, and welcome to another Space Warfighter Talk. I'm your host Bill Wolf, the president and founder of the Space Force Association, and I'm honored today to be speaking with Lieutenant General Doug Schiess, the commander of Space Forces Space. Sir, thanks so much for being with us today.
You bet. Thanks, Hippie, for having me.
And I tell you, before we get going, I'd like to say that we at SFA are super honored to be the only organization solely dedicated to the U.S. Space Force Guardians and their family. And we thank our sponsors for continuing to support SFA's mission and vision. Sir, before we get going, I think it's an important story because we've not spoken in quite some time since you were down at Space Launch Delta at the time, 45th Space Wing. And it was interesting to see you last month at the Space Power Conference, but you were wearing your Lieutenant General rank. Sir, can you talk a little bit about how that transpired and how you were promoted pretty much on the fly?
Yeah, sure. No, it was really cool. Obviously, it was an interesting turn of events, and so I think for most people that are following the military and stuff, know that there was a delay in the confirmations of general officers across the Department of Defense, and then it was very rapidly where that all came through and a bunch of us were all confirmed. I happened to be with the Chief of Space Operations, General Saltzman, and actually the commander at that time of U.S. Space Command, General James Dickinson, and we were with some our allies, some very important meetings in the Combined Space Operations Principals Board. And actually the day before the confirmations came forward, I was actually briefing with my counterpart from Canada on how we were going to continue to develop our relationships with our allies and how we're going to continue to work in the space operations with them. And we discussed how that would eventually be under a 3-star commander and that we would be doing some changes within the Space Force and Space Command. And actually Dr. Plum, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy, actually stopped the conversation. He's like, hey, he's talking about him. That'll be Doug Schiess if this confirmation comes through. And so, and I think most people knew that, but I just, I wasn't going to call myself out in the meeting. And then actually that evening, as things happened back here in the United States, we started to see that maybe this hold of confirmations was going to come to an end. And so we were really looking forward to what that meant. And sometime during that conversation between Dr. Plum and General Saltzman, there was a discussion, hey, if this happens, we're gonna do the promotion tomorrow right in front of our allies there in Berlin. And so thankfully my awesome aide-de-camp had all the accoutrements that we needed to be able to do that. And sure enough, I was awakened by my wife in the middle of the night there in Germany that the confirmations had gone through and that I had been confirmed for this position. And so the next day in front of the allies, which is really cool from the perspective of what we do here at U.S. Space Forces Space, that we could be there with the allies, and General Saltzman was able to promote me. And then I think you were here. That is great. I think we've talked about this before. I've been married to my wife for almost 34 years. She's been there since I was a cadet in ROTC, so she's been there. She has not missed a single promotion, and so she was a little, like, hey, wait a minute. And then my daughters, who are adults, and my mom and Debbie's mom, our dads have passed, and so they just weren't able to be there. And so we decided, hey, we're going to do a promotion ceremony, even though, as you said, the boss said, start wearing the rank, stand up the command, and get going. And so we did that in January, and General Whiting was gracious to come out and do that. And I think he made a joke about, hey, he's actually been a lieutenant general for a month, and this all happened in Berlin. But it was a really cool experience for both. And to seeing you at the Space Forces Association Space Power Conference there in Orlando was great. I just want to thank the SFA for what they do for the Space Force and what they try to do for our families and try to get that message out. I thought the conference was great. It was really good to have it at a smaller venue with all of our family. I think General Gutlein, the new Vice Chief of Space Operations, talked about that we were with our family there. So it was a great event, and thanks for your team for putting that on. So.
Thank you, sir. Really do appreciate that. And congratulations again on your promotion. And yes, you talk about family and family being super important, and so that's what was demonstrated when you had your promotion ceremony last month. So again, congratulations.
Thanks.
Sir, a lot of things have changed. We've been trying to set up this interview for a while, but this has been in the works for quite some time, so we're excited to learn more about Space Forces Space and what that means. And we'll talk a little bit about other interviews we conducted just to kind of pull the thread on some of those. But Sir, just from your standpoint, why is there a need for Space Force's space?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and actually it has been almost over a year that we have planning this. It was actually the first time I actually heard about something about this for the first time was General Saltzman was coming up to visit Vandenberg right after he took over as the CSO, and we had a 1v1, and I don't know that I completely knew then what this would look like, but he discussed how he wanted to bring forward Space Force components to all the combatant commands, and talked about how maybe some changes would happen with how we do that in U.S. Space Command. So that was the first thing. And then actually, I was on vacation last December when the call came that, hey, we need you and General Whiting to start planning for a new service component to U.S. Space Command. And that is what U.S. Space Force's space is, or S4S. We joke that there's so much space going on here that we got to have space in our name twice. Or we just have to be tongue-tied as we try to say it, and that's why we went to S4S. And so I'll let you, if you want to make a joke about that, but it has meaning, and all of our service components are U.S. Space Forces, and then whatever combatant command they are is the next thing. And so I'm sure we'll talk about some of the other components here in a little bit. But what General Saltzman's idea was, and the Secretary of the Air Force, which we briefed him and General Dickinson and the Commander of Space Command several times as we went forward. So almost a year of planning. Now some of that was because of delay of the confirmations, because we had decided that this would be a 3-star general, which is an interesting aspect. General Saltzman and I actually had a conversation recently about the ups and downs of Vandenberg, and I'll talk about it, or you'll hear a little bit about that in the ceremony that we're going to have, of what's happened here at Vandenberg with respect to space. But there's been 1 stars, there's been 2 stars, there's been 3 stars, and so there is a little bit of that. But we're going back to, hey, this is an important component to U.S. Space Command, and it needs to have the proper rank to be able to do that position. But from General Saltzman's perspective, he's trying to align the Space Force like any other service. Every service has a component of their service to each of the combatant commands. And so we did have, actually the first component to any combatant command was Space Operations Command. And my good friend got to be there with you for his change of command and his promotion, Lieutenant General Rock Miller, as he took over SPOC. SPOC used to be the component when we stood this up to U.S. Space Command. But then we had to figure out how to do some of the other things. And so, a little bit of trial and error as we stood up U.S. Space Command, actually several months before the Space Force. We decided to go with 2 functional components. And those functional components were my previous command, Combined Force Space Component Command, and then General Bythewood, and before him, General James, the Joint Task Force Space Defense. And we had 2 functional components that put stuff together to be the warfighting part of U.S. Space Command. But SPOC was still the component to U.S. Space Command. General Saltzman's idea was, hey, I need a component that is fully thinking about warfighting operations, space operations to U.S. Space Command every day, and not worried about organizing, training, and equipping those forces, but receiving those forces and then executing those for the combatant command. And so he said, hey, I've got to split that responsibility, and then that allows SPOC, and you've heard some of the things, I think you had an interview with General Miller, allows them to focus on how they prepare forces to be presented mostly to S4S, but could be to other components as well. And so the idea is that then that allows us to just think about joint warfighting and being the component to U.S. Space Command. What does that mean? General Dickinson, before he left, and now General Whiting has continued, has conferred on me Combined Joint Force Space Component Commander Roles and Responsibilities. That's a mouthful as well in there. But that gives me the joint roles and responsibilities to be able to take the forces that are presented from SPOC and the Space Force to S4S to be able to execute those on behalf of the commander of U.S. Space Command. It also allows me, if General Whiting wants to, can give take-on, tactical control of other services forces to me to be able to execute the mission for U.S. Space Command. And we can talk a little bit more about that if you would like. But this allows us to do that. And so now not that I'm not worried. I know I'm not worried because Rock Miller's got it. But I'm allowing them to do that. I used to be in SPOC. I used to do that job, allowing them to focus on organizing, training, equipping, maintaining readiness, getting them ready, and then presenting them to us, and then we execute the operations on behalf of U.S. Space Command. Hopefully that explains a little bit.
Sir, great summary of everything that's going on. in your command, especially because, like you said, and I really like that point, is other services now can contribute those forces to S4S for execution of the space superiority mission. That's a really important nuance because we as a capability, the Space Force as a capability, has been doing that for so long with other services. And so it'd be akin to, say, the Combined Forces Land Component Commander, who would be representing many different types of forces to ensure land superiority with capabilities from every service. And so now what we've done, or what you've done, and what the Space Force has done is created this componency, this command that ensures that we can bring all space capabilities in to ensure that we can synchronize space superiority efforts. That's no small feat. And so from a just process perspective, how is that how do you foresee that happening just from a day-to-day perspective, realizing that not everyone's going to be in that command bucket all the time?
Right.
And I know we can talk more about this later on because that's going to evolve, but just from your perspective, how do you foresee that taking place?
Yeah, first let's talk about the CGIFSIC roles and responsibilities. You mentioned the CIFLIC or the GIFLIC. I actually had the honor of representing the Space Force at the Combined Force Land Component Commander course at Carlisle there at the Army War College, and so I've been that. I've also been assigned to the CAOC staff and to the CFAC in the CENTCOM area of operations, so I completely know how that works. From a CFAC perspective, that person has all the air, besides maybe some, helicopters or that. So it's whether it's naval air, Air Force air, Army air, missiles, actually the area defense command with Patriots, all that is under the CFAC. And then there's a CIFLIC that has all of the ground forces to do the CENTCOM mission or whatever combatant command they happen to be a part of. And so they could have Army, they could have Marines, they could have Air Force, they could have ground Air Force assets. That's exactly what we're doing with CGIFSIC. So in U.S. Space Command, it's kind of funny, we're actually the newest service component to U.S. Space Command because we changed from SPOC, because they have a service component from all the other services. So it's actually, for all of us old heads, it's a little interesting to think of AF space, but there is an Air Force component to Space Command. They mostly deal with human spaceflight rescue and recovery, but there's a NAV space, a MARFOR space. There's a Space and Missile Defense Command from the Army, and then they also have brought forward Joint Functional Component Command, Integrated Missile Defense, and so there was all those services as well. What the CGIFSIC responsibility gives to me is allows, if the commander of U.S. Space Command, who has received forces from other services, believes for the current fight or maybe current operations, those are better given take-on to the CGIFSIC, then those forces can be given take-on. They keep their OPCON within their services, but they can be given take-on to S4S and the staff there on behalf of the CGIFSIC to do those responsibilities. I think that'll grow. That's on me to work across my other combatant or my component commanders within U.S. Space Command to get those relationships, and we'll see how that continues to evolve. We had a lot of things that we brought over to the Space Force. So, the Army used to do certain SATCOM. They used to do certain missile warning, and so those are now a part of the Space Force, and those were the activities that maybe the CGIFSIC would have done from a TACOM perspective. Those are now part of the Space Force, so those are presented forces to S4S. But there are some other things that are on the cusp of coming from the other services that may be command and controlled by those service components. But again, the U.S. Space Command commander may say, hey, those are better done under the CGIFSIC. That's what that really means. And so hopefully that answers your question, and going forward, I'm happy to take more on that. So.
You bet. You briefed on it, or you touched on it briefly, the relationship between S4S and the other field components. So what is going to be that battle rhythm that is established to ensure that, one, you're focusing on the threats that each geographic and functional combatant command have, and then how does that, how does that feed back to you to ensure that you're presenting the appropriate forces and ensuring that those command relationships are set up? Right.
So obviously equally important, the other component field commands that are service components to those. We've now stood up several with General Mastelier out at Indo-PACOM, with U.S. Space Forces Indo-PACOM, Colonel Toole Putman at U.S. Space Forces Central, and then just most recently U.S. Space Forces Europe Africa with Colonel Max Lance. And then we've also got U.S. Space Forces Korea. And we're looking to do that for all of the combatant commands. That'll take us a while. We don't have enough Guardians to do that. But we're building on what a lot of us remember from the Director of Space Forces standpoint. That wasn't the way to do it once we had a service, but it was the way to do it when the space operations was a part of the Air Force. And we were tied to the CFAC and tied to the Air Operations Center. And so I had the privilege of being the Director of Space Forces for CENTCOM and getting to see how that happened, really being a senior advisor to the CFAC on bringing Space Forces to the theater to be able to do that. What this is the next evolution of that. We are no longer a part of the Air Force. We are no longer tied to the Air Operations Center. Now, we need the Air Force because they do a lot of our support stuff. We may actually sit with them in the AOC and in some of these combatant commands, but we need to have a voice to that combatant commander that is the service component to that combatant commander, and that's what those service components do for them. So for instance, the one I can talk about the easiest is because we did a Tier 1 exercise with INDOPACOM, is Space Forces INDOPACOM, and that's actually the exercise we did to validate the structure of U.S. Space Forces space, and we put ourselves in a position to be able to say, yep, this makes sense, we validated it, let's go forward with doing that. So what does that mean? General Mastelier, there working for Admiral Aquilino, he is the one-shop space for Admiral Aquilino. We can present forces to him. You might think of like electromagnetic sensing or electromagnetic warfare or things that would mostly be in that combatant commander's AOR. Those could be presented to General Mastelier, and then he could command and control those forward. Obviously, space has got a huge AOR above it that is not always over INDOPACOM, but obviously affects the INDOPACOM fight, our competition there. So that's where we come in, and so U.S. Space Command in this case could be the supported or the supporting commander depending upon what's going on. And actually, I had the pleasure of sitting with General Whiting after his change command and his first commander's call, and he said, we need to make sure that it's very clear that we are an and combatant command. We could be supported or we could be supporting. Transportation Command is usually a supporting command. We have the responsibility to both, and we have to do both of those very well. And so in this case, there could be situations where we are supporting INDOPACOM. And so then we're the service component to U.S. Space Command, who has given us DURLOF to work with the service component at INDOPACOM to be able to provide what we like to say in the protect, defend, deliver. In this case, mostly the deliver. We're delivering capabilities to the joint warfighter to be able to do their mission. But we also have to protect and defend so that, one, protect joint warfighters, in this case INDOPACOM warfighters, from a space-enabled attack. And we have to be able to do that. We also have to protect our own assets that could be put at risk by an adversary. And so we had to work with General Mastelier to be able to present those things to him so that he could be then the person that provides that information to Admiral Aquilino. We had a great relationship. As a matter of fact, during the exercise, there was a point where he brought me in to the conversation with Admiral Aquilino, and we were able to have that discussion. I think that will only continue to grow as we grow these Space Force components. There will be exercises with EUCOM or AFRICOM that will do the same with Space Force Europe Africa. And then just because of the day-to-day operations in the Central Command area of operations, we're already doing that with Space Force CENTCOM. And so that's how we'll do it. Whether we're supporting or supported, we will work through with that component to that combatant commander to be able to give them what they need to be able to do from space to be able to get their mission done.
Sir, it covers a lot, and I love going into the doctrine aspect of this because it's all laid out in doctrine very clearly, and if you just pay attention, you'll see how it relates directly to the space superiority mission. And so I remember being in those positions as well with the DS4 staff and talking about space ops directives and how air ops directives would present those capabilities to that combatant command, and they would know exactly what those were. So then when you talk about the exercises, it's very clear what capabilities we're talking about and to tease out what other capabilities need to be presented or what other capabilities need to be developed based on the threat. So from your perspective, let's transition quickly into the threats. So what from a threat perspective are you focusing on?
Yeah, so you and I been around this game for a long time, and we used to say that space was a benign environment, and we probably kind of smirked a little bit when we said that, because I'm not sure it ever was a benign environment, but obviously an important environment, and important for our way of life and the things that we do. When I'm out and about and I'm wearing my Space Force swag around, and someone will come up and, are you in the Space Force, and talk to you, that's where I have to try to explain to them, hey, there are so many capabilities that they have, that the American people and our allies, their citizens have, that are dependent on space. The fact of using an ATM, the fact of GPS. I don't know how many times I will talk to someone and I'll remind them that GPS is brought to you by the Space Force, and if that wasn't there, you wouldn't be able to get where you needed to go. Nobody remembers Thomas Maps anymore, or how you look for things. It's all on your phone, and so, but just critical. Satellite communications, everybody wants their DirecTV, everybody wants their ability. Starlink, the ability to have internet just about anywhere, and so it's becoming much more important. So what are the threats that are out there? Our potential adversaries or competitors have been watching us for many, many years, and they've watched our actions in the Middle East, and they basically said, hey, we know that our joint warfighting capability is reliant on space operations. It used to be when we were youngins, you'd go to someone maybe in one of the other services, and they wouldn't understand what space brought to the fight. I don't think that happens anymore. When I run into my colleagues in the Army or the Marine Corps or the Navy, they clearly know that space enables their warfighting abilities and their warfighting job. And so they know that. So we don't have to explain that to them, but we may have to explain some of the threats. I think that's getting out there too, as we've started talking more about the threats that are out there. So just a little bit on that. So China is building an infrastructure and a space capability to go after our competitive advantage in space. And so we can go back to 2007 when they first demonstrated a direct descent anti-satellite and took out one of their own satellites, creating an orbital debris cloud that put the whole domain in danger. As a matter of fact, we still collect on some of that debris today. But they've also developed lasers that they can try to degrade satellites. They can try to mask what they're doing. They have jamming capability to jam our communications. They also have a satellite, and they've demonstrated the ability to grapple one of their own satellites and move that satellite to another orbit. And of course, they have said that is to do, debris removal or other things. But that could have been a U.S. satellite or an allied satellite that they grappled and took to a different orbit, and then changed our ability to be able to do our mission. And so they are getting after incredible capability to be able to put our assets at risk. Closely followed by Russia and their ability to do the same thing. So November 2021, they also demonstrated the ability to do an anti-satellite test against one of their satellites, causing even more debris that we now have to track. And as a matter of fact, it's amazing to me that they also put their own cosmonauts in danger in the International Space Station by doing that. And I'm thankful that the United States has decided that we are not going to conduct destructive anti-satellite testing. And I'm thankful for our allies who have also come out to say that, because it just can make the domain unusable for all of us if we continue down this route. But Russia also has satellites. The famous nesting doll satellite, a satellite that could get close to another satellite and put out another satellite or a projectile. The ability to follow one of our national security satellites. They have demonstrated the ability to do that. They also have jammers. They also have lasers. And while they are involved in this invasion of Ukraine, they're continuing to bring these capabilities on. As a matter of fact, at the very beginning of the Ukrainian invasion, they did a cyber attack against a commercial SATCOM user that I think they thought probably would only affect those users in Ukraine, but actually affected users across most of Europe. And so there is threats everywhere. I could go on and on. And it's not just those. There are other countries out there that are trying to be potential adversaries in that case. So the threat is real. And so that is one of the reasons we stood up S4S. That's one of the reasons we have a Space Force and a Space Command, because the threat is real and we have to be able to defend our assets.
Sir, thank you for that summary of what we know is that tremendous threat that exists in that domain. And I think something that's often lost on the U.S. partners, allied countries, is that anything we do in space any kind of exploration, any kind of testing or just going out into the space domain is underpinned by our ability to have space superiority to ensure that anything we do in that domain is protected. And that's where the Space Force comes in. So I just want to hit that point very hard because I think it's lost on a lot of folks. And if you really want to see a really good breakdown of this, just from a launch perspective, just listen to an interview we did with Major General Gagnon recently, the S2, the Chief of Intel for the Space Force. And he talks about space launch and the number of space launches compared to US and China. The fact is every China launch, because it's a communist state, is really for the government of China. Whereas you look at the US launch history and it is predominantly civil or private sector with a small majority being defense. And so here you are ensuring freedom of action in the space domain with your mission set to ensure prosperity for everybody. And that's really what it's all about, is making sure that everyone has access to this domain while at the same time protecting our national interests with our partner allied countries. So thank you for that description, but I think it's important to put a fine point on the criticality of the work that you're doing.
Hey, if I may on that,
yes,
I think
sir.
one of the other things on that is our interactions with our commercial partners. And so I talked about Starlink a little bit earlier, and they're just one of the commercial partners. But one of the things that is in our job jar here at S4S is that interaction with the commercial partners, also the coalition partners. And we are doing that now, probably at the beginning stages as the commercial, not that the commercial companies haven't already been doing this, but that interaction, making sure that they understand what's going on in the space domain so that they can take necessary actions from them. So we have right here with us at the Combined Space Operations Center, the Commercial Integration Cell, where we have a few companies that are, they're cleared to the security levels that they need to be. All those companies provide commercial aspects to everyone, but they also provide some information or services to the Department of Defense. And we've started that relationship with them. So one, they can come to us with, hey, we saw this happen, can you give us some more information, and we can provide that back. But we also can warn them and provide them information. So for instance, November 2021, Russian anti-satellite, we were able to provide that information out at a faster pace to those commercial companies that we're working. We are looking to expand that. Obviously, there are commercial companies in the space domain, as you know probably better than I do, every day coming, and so we have to figure out how to do that. But that is a huge part of our job here, because as you said, that helps the American people and our allies' way of life is our commercial space to be able to, one, even with our NASA partners, to explore, but to provide capabilities to make our life better. And so we have to be able to help them in that domain as well.
Perfect, sir. No, that's a great point. In fact, people are probably watching this broadcast right now via Starlink, because that's the way SFA operates.
That's right. Yeah.
We did host an event last year in partnership with Space Systems Command called CASR, or Commercial Augmentation Space Reserve. Now, you spoke about how you're partnering with commercial just to look at what potential threats are to capabilities. But because the Space Force is so different and so unique and relatively small compared to all the other services, and we're doing our job to try to ensure you all have the resources you need to accomplish your space superiority mission. That being said, what does that, in your mind, what could that look like, hypothetically, in terms of augmenting Space Force capabilities with commercial assets?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and obviously our partners down at Space Systems Command are working through what CASR means and how to bring that on. You know, you could look at it from an air side, and we've got airliners or cargo planes ready to go if we need to be able to augment our own transportation systems. I see it a little differently, and I'm waiting to see how SSC brings that out. But from my perspective, we already do some of that. We have commercial satellites that are remotely piloted aircraft are using right now. And so what that does is it allows the Space Systems Command and the folks that acquire systems to look at, do I need to acquire this system, or can I just can I just contract for this system? For us, as we continue on that, then we have to look at, we use the words command and control, and when we talk command and control with the commercial entities, they may not understand what that means. We have to figure out what that means from a contracting standpoint, from what levers do I have to be able to get what we need to do. But that is, we are going to definitely get after that, because it makes us better. It makes us better to be able to do that. It also allows us to take our precious resources and put them in the things that are primarily military and the things that we need to do. And so I look forward to working with soon Lieutenant General Grant as he takes over Space Systems Command and how that goes forward. I was been many times in the launch business, and obviously the commercial has helped us be able to launch. You talked about that, and be able to launch at a much greater rate than we ever had. And so we've got to leverage our commercial companies to be able to get our mission done.
Yes, sir. And Invictus Knox was a perfect example of that. I'm sure our audience would be very interested to hear and understand from you how quickly a capability could be sitting in the barn,
Yep.
and then launched on orbit checkout, and then actually transferred over to S4S for execution.
Yeah. So the whole idea of dynamic space operations or tactically responsive space is very, very important to us. Obviously, we're waiting for those things to continue to get evolved. But so an example, I guess, is what I would say is, as we look at a resilient architecture that is out there that we may have as we look to the next generation of satellite systems and things like that, if we have the ability to put something up like that, Invictus Knox, and the ability to do that, that gives us an increased capability in case somebody's going after one of our systems. It also gives us a capability of, if we get to the point where we can match a payload with a bus to a satellite. And so I'm really a fan of where we're going. And I know General Gutlein, the new Vice Chief of Space Operations, will take his love for that to his next job. And so that's good. The other thing is, I think there's other things besides tactically responsive space. As we look at satellites, right now we make a lot of decisions based on the amount of fuel that a satellite came with when we got it. What if we didn't have to do that? What if we could refuel that satellite? What if we could launch another one much quicker? And so then I could do whatever I want with that satellite, because I know that I can launch another one within days if I need to. And so all of that is on the beginning stages of where we're going to go, and then that'll eventually get into our warfighting experiences as well.
How exciting, what a time to be in the Space Force and all the changes that are happening. Sir, last question from me. You talked about it already, is having folks focus on the organized training and equip mission, which General Miller is working on there at Space Operations Command. So what does that look like in terms of having time for them to do the OT&E versus time focus on providing those forces to S4S?
Yeah.
And I know we're going to hear some more probably from the CSO in the very near term, but just from your perspective, can you talk briefly about that?
Yeah, General Miller and I have talked, we've grown up together, and so we've had a lot of these conversations many, many times back when we were captains and majors and lieutenant colonels. And so here's how I see it, and I think, I watched your interview of General Miller, so I know what he thinks too. But what I said organized, train, equip, and that's kind of the military term. But General Miller is going to generate, present, and sustain, and then he's added improve combat forces to be presented to a Space Force component that works for a combatant commander. And so the relationship between him and and our commands is very, very important. So almost similar to how these are done in other services, but I think we'll do it better. Is as we go through a rotation of Space Force generation. I look at what's coming out on the next horizon for what's going on, whether that's exercises or we're starting to see, there might be a potential competition in this area. I'm providing that input back to SPOC and saying, hey, these are the things, almost a pre-deployment or a unit preparation message. These are the things that I'm going to need from forces that are going to be presented to me. Then General Miller and his team takes that and he looks at the forces that are maybe in the next container that are get ready to be then eventually presented. He goes, hey, what kind of advanced training maybe what do I need to ask Space Systems Command to give me in capability so that when it is their turn to come forward and be presented to Space Forces Space or to one of the other service components, they're ready to do that. And so that's that relationship between the two of us, and that really what it is. Besides our 2 operational centers that have deltas that provide them, so Delta 5 and 15 for the National Space Defense Center for Delta 15 and the CSPOC, the Combined Space Operations Center for Delta 5, I don't have any forces. I get them all presented from SPOC, and then they're presented for a period of time where they're in their force generation period, and then they're given to us to be able to do the mission. And so we're relying on SPOC to generate, present, sustain, and improve them so that when they get to the container, the whatever we want to call it, they're ready to go. And so then I can then use them appropriately to get after either the commander of U.S. Space Command's needs, or maybe even help another service component to get after what their needs are. And so that's what I see that relationship in. There's a give and go there, so that we're providing feedback back. After that rotation, then maybe General Miller and I and our staffs get together and go, hey, did that work the way we thought it was? Let's provide that back into the system so that the next forces, as they generate, present, sustain, and improve, are ready to go for the next time that we're in. And so I'm really excited about that. I think we've talked about that for a long time. For those of us that have been there before, it's a little difficult to do with a deployed in place, but difficult doesn't mean we can't do it. And so that's where we're going to work together to be able to get after that. So.
It's really exciting, sir. For young Guardians, and this is an easy one, for young Guardians who are listening to you right now and they're really excited, obviously, about being in the Space Force as well, what would you say to them, just to inspire them and say, hey, we need your help, we need everything you're doing, and thanks for being a part?
Yeah, so, and I apologize, I should have mentioned Guardians from the very beginning, because that's how we take care of our mission. It's not organizations, it's not S4S, it's Guardians doing the mission each and every day. And I'm impressed. I don't know that I would have made the cut back when I was coming in to the kind of Guardians that we get today. But what I would tell them is be bold, be innovative, and think about the warfighting culture that we need to have in the Space Force, and don't settle for mediocre. We need to be the best that we can be, so that we can be the best for the nation. And I'm really impressed with the Guardians that we have, and really looking forward to seeing what they continue to do as they continue to build the Space Force.
Perfect. Sir, thanks so much for taking time today to talk about the critically important mission and command that you just stood up. And congratulations on the new command. And we look forward to hearing more as this command evolves and to follow up on all these discussion points that we had today. To learn more about the Space Force Association, please go to ussfa.org. Thanks again.